So we have some presets that we can provide, and these are just kind of usually from past weddings that just kind of worked out, and we'll carry them over into the next wedding and then maybe tweak them a little bit to give that wedding kind of a little bit more of its own look. We do want to stay consistent with kind of our style, so every wedding, as far as the style and the colors and things like that, it matches similarly. But say a wedding was a little bit more kind of dark and contrasty and moody, we'll maybe change up the color correction for that. Or say it was a lot of outside bright light, kind of light airy look, we want to match that a little bit more while still kind of staying within our color tones that we use. I'm going to go here, and I'm not sure if any of these are going to necessarily match, but say for example this is our wedding starter preset. Everything looks pretty good when I throw that on, but one of the main things I always like to do is to check the white balance. So not a lot of things to kind of pick from, but I'll pull the color picker and try to find something that's kind of white. That's not exactly white, so it's going to be a little off, but just to kind of give us an idea. A really good one that you can always kind of color picker is the dress. You can't get much wrong with that unless she doesn't have a white dress. But normally the bride is going to want her dress to be the pure white that it was, so that's always a good place to kind of pick your color from. So I applied the preset there, and then I'm going to color pick on there. It looks a little too blue, so I'll maybe tweak it a little bit and kind of get that to look how it should look. And then the one thing I love to check is my histogram. So if you're not familiar with how a histogram works, basically the left side are your darks and your blacks and your shadows, and the lights. The right side is the light side, and it's your whites, your highlights, how bright the image is. The middle is kind of like where we want a lot of the stuff to kind of fall. Now, granted, there might be an image that's very contrasty and there's a lot of shadow, so your left side is going to be very heavy, but that's okay because it's kind of image that it's supposed to be. But if it's a very kind of neutral image, you kind of want everything to kind of fall within the middle, and it's a good place to kind of check if you're a little too hot, a little too dark with the image. So I'll kind of go through, maybe it could use a little bit of a boost, so I'll maybe boost the exposure a little bit. We like to have a little bit of contrast, so normally what you're kind of seeing from that preset, this is kind of the layout that it follows, and we tweak it a little bit as needed. So we always boost the contrast a little bit. We'll lower the highlights some, so that way it'll bring back some of that detail. Say maybe we were running and gunning and it was bright outside and we couldn't get completely adjusted to the right exposure. It's nice to kind of bring those highlights down in case something got a little overexposed, so we bring some of that detail back. We'll usually boost the shadows a little bit. We'll lower the whites, which would be just like the highlights, just kind of bringing back some of that detail that might have been lost from a little bit overexposure. And then the blacks will boost as well to kind of bring back some shadows. Then when we get the presents, we'll raise the clarity a little bit. That just kind of makes it a little bit sharper of an image, and then we boost the vibrance a little bit as well by 10, just to kind of give it a little bit more pop with the colors. Next, we kind of have like a custom curves that we follow. So normally what we're looking for is almost kind of an S curve to the image, and that just kind of adds a little bit more contrast and helps the image pop a little bit more. You can really get more complicated with the stuff, but this is just kind of the basics of what we do. We do get a little bit more in depth with our color correction when we're really sitting down and getting to work, but this is just kind of a brief overview of what does what and what we usually change with the image. Next, we would be at hue saturation, and there's a few things that we change, and usually they all kind of match this style. So with hue, what you're doing is you're basically changing kind of where the color lands. Not super technical on what exactly is happening, but basically when you look at the image, what's kind of happening is blue is a good example. So if you take a look at the carpet down there, if I go this way, it's shifting it towards a almost like magenta purpley kind of color. If I go this way, it's turning it into almost like a bluish green color, and you can kind of see where that's happening. And some of these we like to automatically kind of move one way or the other. So like when it comes to reds, we would rather them go a little bit more towards the orange, so that's why the preset already kind of goes a little bit more towards orange than that. Same with green kind of goes green to yellow, and we would rather be closer to the greens than having it look yellow. So like if you saw a grassy field, we would rather the grass kind of resemble more of like a greenish blue than like a yellowish green, just because it makes it look like the grass was a lot nicer. Next, we go to saturation. With saturation, we do lower a lot of things just because they kind of distract sometimes. So like, you know, reds, we like to lower that a little bit sometimes because, you know, red can be a very distracting color if it's in the background. Now, if it's a focal point, we might want to actually boost that a little bit, but with an image like this, there's nothing really in there that we want red. So we'll, you know, subtract from that. Orange will also lower a little bit, but not nearly as much because orange is also a lot of times kind of a skin tone. So we want that to look nice. And then everything else kind of comes down a few, and we kind of make up for that then with when we increase up here the vibrance. So that brings back some of those colors that we're maybe lowering. And then we move on here to luminancy. And with luminancy, same kind of thing. There's a few we lower, but then there's actually a few that will boost. And that just kind of gives it the color look that it has. But like I was kind of mentioning, sometimes we'll need to fine tune these things here and there. Next up, you have split toning. And we go for kind of like a film look, I guess you would say. Like, so our highlights, we would rather be a little bit more orange. Not a lot though, as you can see, there's only 5. And then our shadows, we try to make it a little bit more blue. So what basically is happening is any of the shadows become blue whenever you raise this. So all the area you saw back here that was dark, it's making those shadows turn blue. Obviously that's way more than we would ever want, but we do like a little bit of that effect happening. So we keep this pretty low, and this is baked into the preset as well. Next you have details. So we do add a little bit of sharpening to the image, usually about 25. We don't add noise reduction unless we need it. So this might come in handy, say during the dancing photos. If you saw that the ISO limits were pushed pretty high, like 6400 or something, then that's where the noise reduction could really come in handy. You don't want to go too crazy with it because it will start kind of softening the image. But a little bit here and there is kind of good. And a little bit of grain is not bad for the image either. It actually sometimes looks nice, especially sometimes when we're shooting with mirrorless, the way it creates grain actually looks like a film grain and actually looks very pleasant on the image. Next we have lens correction. Not all of our lenses have presets, but most of them do. So this one was shot on a Sigma 35 Art. So if I would hit enable profile corrections, it's going to automatically fill in all this information for us. You can usually check by just looking up here and seeing what the focal length was and seeing how it kind of plays out. Our main lenses that do have this, I believe, the 35, the 85, and then I think our 24 to 70 have a preset. Some of our older Minolta lenses that we sometimes use with our Sony do not have any preset, so we aren't able to add anything to it. And it doesn't do a lot, but it does come in handy sometimes. As you can see with this, it removes a little bit of like the vignette kind of compression that it's doing on the image. Transform, nothing we do there. Don't need to worry about that. Effects, nothing we normally need to do there. Now, we do add a little bit of grain back to the image, as you can see here. Not even really a lot is necessary. This is maybe even a little bit more than we might need, so you might want to lower that to like 10 or something like that. But I think the preset starts at 30, so just kind of keep an eye on that. And you can also add a vignette here. We don't really do that a lot, but sometimes an image, it might come in handy. A lot of times we'll do that manually though with brushes, which we'll get to. Then calibration will all be set up for you within the preset, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's pretty much covers the kind of color correction. Now, let's say it's an image where we want to do a little bit more work, so we'll jump back over here, one of our yellow images. And actually what I would do is I would have filtered through all these. So we have 3 here that we know that we're going to do a lot more work to. So we'll take this one right here. Now, when I say more work, what I basically mean is anything that's more than the color correction. So a lot of these images are probably just going to get kind of a color tweak and then copy it over the next one, copy it over the next one, just kind of keep moving on. But there's going to be a few images that are going to need a little bit more work like this, where we're probably going to use this, you know, as one of their main images. If they end up doing an album, whatever it would be, we're going to hand this over to them. So some of the changes that would be happening here is spot removal. So if you click on spot removal here, pretty simple. You just kind of click the item that you want to disappear and it will figure out what's the best place to kind of replace it for. Not always perfect, so sometimes you might have to move this guy around to kind of get something that works the best. And once you're happy with that, you just hit done. Back here at spot removal, you can do some fine tuning and stuff too, but normally a lot of times kind of just going off the default works pretty well. Another thing that we might do when we highlight the image yellow would be any kind of touch-up to the person or the image itself. So there's basically kind of 3 main items that we use down here at the bottom, and those would be iris enhance, soften skin, and teeth whitening. So this one we can't see our eyes, so we won't need to do any of that. But with the soften skin, even with this one, it's kind of a wider shot. I don't know if I would even really bother with it. So we don't even really need to worry about this. Teeth whitening could maybe come in handy just because she does have a big smile on. So what I would do is I would click on teeth whitening. It's already a preset with what you would need. I would zoom in a little bit more so I can see a little bit better in the image. And then I would go in with the brush. One thing I like to turn on is show selected mask overlay. It's shortcut key O, or you just hit this little check mark right here. And what that's going to do is while I start painting here, it's going to cover up what I'm painting in the red. Super helpful to figure out what you've done and what you haven't done. So I'll kind of paint that in how I want. And then say I go a little too much over, so I end up getting up here somehow. I can then hit the Alt key and I'll have basically my eraser. And then with the bracket keys on your keyboard, you can actually make it smaller or make it bigger. So I'm going to make it smaller and then remove anywhere where I might have messed up. Once I feel pretty happy with it, I usually turn this off so I can either click here or hit the O key. And now I see that everything looks good. So I'll kind of zoom out, make sure it's good. I'll hit done, and then I'll move on kind of to the next image. Some other things that we might tweak to the image would be adding any kind of effects or changing the lighting. So you might have saw here in the brushes there's a burn and dodge technique. So say for example I want the ground to be darker than the top part of the image. I'll go in, start coloring that in and make it a darker image. You can even fine tune everything, so if I want it to go really dark I can do that. We also have presets from lens distortion, which you can either use over here in your presets tab or you can use right here, and they all work just like basically like normal brushes. So say I want to add some bokeh to this image, which wouldn't make a lot of sense. There's an option for that. There's also like a light flare one, which is really good for outdoor images that you can use, and then there's also these that are already made up. So basically what I would do is just drop this on there and we'd have some bokeh. Gotta love bokeh. And then so that would basically do that. Now let's find an image where we would do a little bit more work too. And so we would have labeled this 4 and then we would have labeled this with the 7, which would be yellow. We'll filter our needing editing photos. Go here, click on this. So with this one it's a little bit closer, so I would maybe do a little bit of softening to the skin. So we'll go down here. I'm just going to kind of start coloring in where I want softened. A lot of times you don't need to really worry about arms or anything like that, but the face is always a crucial part, mattering on how close we are. And even this image I think would probably be actually kind of fine without it, but every little bit adds to the value. Now what I would do, I know like his eyes were a little more squinted in this one, so maybe not the best example, but if it was a more open eye photo, we would go in here and with holding the Alt key, so we have the eraser, erase anywhere where we don't want it to be softer. So this would be like eyes, this would be teeth, and also anywhere where we might have missed. So anywhere maybe around the image. If we got some of the hair, we'll get rid of that. Ears are good to have softened. And once we feel pretty good with it, we can also adjust things. So if you feel like it's making it look too soft, which it might be, especially a lot of times with the guys it looks a little too soft, you can always lower clarity and that will help that out. Once we're happy with that, we'll hit done. Now let's say there's a little bit more sun coming through and we wanted to emphasize that. We would find one of the presets for that. So let's go with one of the skylight ones. So we'll bring that in. And then if I actually go to one of my options here, like brush, I can actually click on these and kind of drag them around where I need to. Something like that, yeah. So that would maybe work. I probably want to brighten up their faces and stuff. I'm trying to make this kind of fake looking sun peeking through or whatever. But otherwise that would be basically what we would do with that. So as I was talking about earlier with the bride and her bridesmaids, what I would do is I would grab my preset, and it might not be exactly it, like that kind of looks a little green. Go in here, hit that. Let's say, you know, it needed a little realigned or whatever. I would do all that stuff. You can actually do that with this and you can realign it. But just make sure everything looks good. Probably boost the brightness a little bit. And then what you can do is you could either make a preset of this. So create new preset, call it like bride and bridesmaids. New group. So this will be the folder that it goes in. Just call it bride for now. Just make sure it has everything you want in there. So like with this one, we don't want the transform to carry over because, you know, we might needed to rotate this one because it's a little crooked, but then the next one might be perfectly straight. So if we do that, it's then going to make all of our images that were perfectly straight become crooked. So we want to avoid that. But a lot of the other stuff is probably going to carry over, like basic tone, tone curves, white balance, color, all that stuff. So we now have a preset, so we could apply this preset to all of them, or actually what you can even do is right click this image that we just edited, go to develop settings, hit copy settings, make sure you copy over all the info that you want. And now I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to right click them, hit develop settings and paste settings. Give it a second to load, and now all these images are going to have that same effect and color change and everything basically applied to them. Now some of these, you know, maybe the sun changed or something and they got a little darker, so you might have to kind of just scrub through them all real quick, do some quick, you know, exposure changes, white balance changes, things like that. So now we have all of our, what I would call like our best for them photos that we're going to deliver to them. So what I would do is I would hit Control A, which will select all. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to export right there. Now these are going to be basically their JPEGs that they're going to get with no watermark, as high of quality as can, while still compressing it a little bit so it's not super crazy. So these are the ones that will go on their thumb drive if they're getting a thumb drive. These will be the photos that we'll use when we do their albums, and then also these will go up on Zenfolio or whatever web hosting site that we might be using at the time. So therefore they're ready to go online, so we can share them that link as well. So I will make a folder then, usually in the same place as the other photos and their catalog, their Lightroom catalog. Select that, and then I'll put it into a subfolder. So usually I'll call the one that's going to be for them like something like final, maybe their names, and then no watermark, just so I remember. And then I'll rename the photos. So you'll want to be on custom name X of Y. And I will name it usually just their names. So names, and you always want to start on 1. Then, if needed, I will resize. But usually with these, we like to keep them as high of resolution as we can, so we won't do any of that. I do add a little bit of sharpening to the screen, so usually just high. If it seems like it's sharpening it too much, we'll maybe lower it to standard. No watermark for this one, and that is pretty much set up. Ready to go. So I'll hit export. It's going to export out all these images for them. And while that one's going on, we can actually do our other export phases. So we basically have 3 phases. So that's the main one, just to make sure we have the images that we need. The next one we'll do will be the best of the best, but we're going to do 2 versions of the best, and we'll do one with watermark and without watermark. So what I'll do is I'll filter down to all my 5s or my reds, however I labeled them. I'm going to select all these, the best of the best, and then I'm going to either right click, go to export, or you could do the shortcut on the keyboard, which would be Control Shift E. I'm now going to make a new folder, and I'll just name it, you know, so no watermark, best, and then maybe include their names in there too. And then just to, so there's no confusion, I can always I'll add something like best or something like that, just so I know those are different. Everything else will be the same. I do usually resize these so they're not quite as big. So there's different ways you can do it. Megapixel seems to work fine for now. I don't know if it's the best way, but it at least works for us just so we can get these on web where they're not so big. So I'll lower it usually to like 20 megapixel. Keep the resolution, you know, wherever we can, the highest we can. And then I'll hit export, have those exporting out. And then we'll do the very last one. So we'll Control Shift E, and I'm going to name these ones watermark, best, name, and then I'll add a watermark to these just so I know which ones are which. Same thing with this one. We'll go ahead and resize, and then we're going to add a watermark. So you'll have to set this up the first time you use it. We have one made already, but what you'll need to do is go to Edit Watermarks, and I'm going to send over the image so you have it. And what you would want to do is go to Choose, and then you'll go to where the image is, select it. So we have it right here. And then we usually put it in the right corner just like this. So literally, if you want to take this video and just copy exactly what these settings are, be totally fine. I'll leave these up here for a second. And then you'll hit done. It's now created. Hit export. So now we basically have three processes for the exporting. We have the photos for them, and then we have, very similar to each other, the best of the best, where we have one with a watermark and one without a watermark. The reason for that is if we want to use these on our website or something, we really don't need the watermark. But if we want to use these on social media, like Facebook, Instagram, whatever it be, we kind of prefer having the watermark just so people have a place to link back to, so they know where the images came from. So these are exporting out, and we'll let those do their thing. And that is basically the run through of what we would do for Lightroom. Obviously there's more you can do within there. One main thing that would probably come in handy that I'll show you is if you need to do some fine tuning that Lightroom just doesn't provide but Photoshop would, or if you're just comfortable with doing it in Photoshop, you can take any image in here, you can right click on it, and there's an option to edit in, and then you would edit in Photoshop, and it'll basically pull your image right into Photoshop. And once you're done, you just hit Control S or go up to the menu and hit save, and it will then have two copies within Lightroom. It will have your Photoshop version, but then it will also have your version that wasn't edited, that was just from Lightroom. So just kind of keep that in mind too, that when you're exporting, if you do use Photoshop at all, that you're just exporting out the finished one and not the finished and non-finished version of it. So that is our Lightroom walkthrough. I hope that gives you a better idea of how our workflow works, and hopefully you can take some tips and tricks from there to speed up your workflow process. Please let me know if you have any other questions or anything we can help with.